There is a scene in the 9th season of South Park where Randy Marsh gets pulled over by the police. He is drunk. His son Stan is in the car. So are Kyle, Cartman, and Ike. Randy has been trying to urinate into a beer bottle while driving, which is the kind of detail South Park includes not because it is funny on its own, but because it tells you something true about the person doing it. Randy is not a man who drinks and then gets behind the wheel. He is a man who cannot separate the drinking from the driving, who has folded the substance so completely into the machinery of his daily life that the bottle is in his hand at the moment his hands should be on the wheel. The police arrest him, his license is revoked. His son watches the whole thing from the passenger seat, with the specific kind of embarrassment that only a child can feel when a parent becomes a public spectacle. The episode is called Bloody Mary. It is the 14th and final episode of Season 9. It aired on December 7th, 2005, which happened to be the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a Catholic holy day. The timing was not an accident, though the controversy that followed had almost nothing to do with what the episode actually said about addiction. The controversy was about a bleeding statue of the Virgin Mary, and it consumed so much oxygen that almost nobody at the time talked about what was underneath it. What was underneath it was one of the most specific, most quietly radical arguments about alcoholism and personal responsibility that an animated comedy had ever put on television. Trey Parker, who created South Park alongside Matt Stone, has said on the DVD commentary for this episode that the scene where Randy gets arrested for drunk driving is based on something that happened to him when he was 9 years old. His own father, his own car, his own version of sitting in the back seat watching a parent fail in a way that is too big and too public to be absorbed by a child in real time. Parker put that experience into a cartoon and gave it to a character named Randy Marsh, and then spent the next 20 years circling back to it, adding layers, contradicting himself, arriving at answers he would later abandon, and building without quite meaning to the most complicated portrait of addiction that any animated show has ever produced. South Park has been on the air since August 13th, 1997. It has produced 338 episodes across 28 seasons as of December 2025. It was the first weekly television program to receive a TVMA rating. It is created almost entirely by two men, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who write, direct, voice, and oversee the production of nearly every episode themselves. And the way they make the show matters to the story, because South Park is not assembled the way other television is assembled. Each episode is written, voice recorded, animated, and delivered in approximately 6 days. This process was documented in a 2011 behind-the-scenes film called 6 Days to Air, and the speed of it means that what ends up on screen is closer to instinct than intention. When Parker and Stone write an episode about Randy's drinking, or Towelie's drug spiral, or Stan's compulsive spending, they are not executing a carefully planned multi-season arc. They are responding to something that feels true in the moment, putting it through the machine and shipping it out the door before the week is over. This matters because the addiction stories South Park has told over 28 seasons were not designed to fit together. They were written independently, often years apart, by writers operating at a pace that does not leave room for the kind of careful thematic planning that prestige television relies on, and yet they do fit together. Not perfectly, not without contradiction, but consistently enough that when you lay them side by side, a pattern emerges that no individual episode was trying to create. A worldview about substances and dependency and what it means to live with a need you cannot name and cannot quit forms itself across the full run of the show. And it is a worldview that is more honest, more complicated, and more unsettling than anything the show has ever said about politics or religion or any of the other subjects it is famous for attacking. If you have watched South Park, you probably think the show treats addiction as a joke. Today we are going to prove that it does not. This is Red Umbrella, and this is every addiction story South Park has ever told. To understand what South Park believes about addiction, you have to start where the show started, not with the children, although the children are usually the ones who see most clearly. You have to start with the adults, specifically with the adults of South Park, Colorado, who drink the way characters in other shows breathe, constantly and without comment. Randy Marsh is Stan's father. He is a geologist by profession. Though the show abandoned any serious engagement with his career somewhere around the 10th season and replaced it with a series of increasingly absurd obsessions. He coaches his son's baseball team, he gets into fights at Little League games, he has opinions about everything and expertise in almost nothing. He is the adult character South Park has invested the most screen time in across the show's run, and by the 23rd season, the creators had essentially promoted him from supporting player to the show's main character. His voice is provided by Trey Parker, the same person who experienced the drunk driving arrest as a child and turned it into the opening of Bloody Mary. Randy's relationship with alcohol is not a subplot. It is the foundation on which the character is built. He drinks at home, he drinks at bars, he drinks at his son's school events. He drinks before driving, during driving, and after the consequences of driving. Drunk have been imposed on him by the legal system. The show does not present this as tragic, at least not most of the time. It presents it as Randy. This is who he is, this is what he does. The drinking and the man are the same thing, and the show decided this very early and has never seriously argued against it. The town of South Park itself operates as a place where alcohol is the default social lubricant. The adults gather at bars, they drink at home while watching the news, they drink at holiday events and school functions and town meetings. When the show needs to convey that the adults are relaxed or happy or celebrating, it puts drinks in their hands. When it needs to convey that they are stressed or angry or grieving, it puts drinks in their hands. The substance is present in every emotional state the adult characters experience, which means it is never coded as the problem in any specific scene. It is simply the weather of the town, always there, rarely commented on, shaping everything without being named as a force. This is the context into which every addiction story the show tells is born. The baseline is not sobriety, the baseline is drinking. And the stories the show builds on top of that baseline are not about whether the characters should drink, because that question was answered before the first episode aired. They are about what happens when the drinking, or the drugs, or the gambling, or whatever form the substance takes, crosses some invisible line from the ordinary background noise of South Park life into something the show can no longer ignore. Randy crosses that line in Bloody Mary. He crosses it specifically because the police catch him, not because the show decides his drinking has become a problem on its own terms. The legal system intervenes. Randy is ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for 2 weeks. And what happens at those meetings is where the episode becomes something more than a drunk driving story. The AA meetings are presented as deeply religious. The attendees are told they are powerless over alcohol. They are told that only a higher power can cure them. They are told that alcoholism is a disease, something that has happened to them rather than something they are doing. Randy, who the show has established across 9 seasons as a man who will believe almost anything if it is presented with enough authority, absorbs this completely. He does not just accept the disease model. He embraces it. He starts using a wheelchair. He begins behaving as though his alcoholism is a terminal illness rather than a pattern of choices. And the show films this descent into performed helplessness with a specific kind of dark comedy that South Park does better than almost anyone. Stan watches all of this. Stan, who is 9 years old, who was in the car when his father was arrested, who has been watching his father drink for his entire life without anyone ever naming what he was watching, is the character the show trusts to see clearly when the adults cannot. And Stan's response to the AA framework is immediate and total rejection. Stan crashes an AA meeting. He challenges the premise directly. He tells the room that telling his father he has a disease is making him worse, not better. He argues that his father does not need a higher power. He needs discipline, personal responsibility. the ability to look at the thing he is doing and decide on his own, without a miracle or a deity or a 12-step program, to do less of it. The AA members kick Stan out. They are not interested in what a 9-year-old has to say about addiction, but the show is. The show puts Stan's argument at the center of the episode and builds the entire second half around proving him right. There is a bleeding statue of the Virgin Mary in a nearby town. Crowds gather hoping to be healed of their ailments. Randy, convinced he needs a miracle to cure his disease, goes to see the statue. The statue sprays blood on him. Randy declares himself healed. He gets out of his wheelchair. He announces he will never drink again. Then Pope Benedict XVI arrives to investigate. He determines that the statue is not bleeding from its rear, as everyone assumed, but from its vagina. Since women bleed from their vaginas regularly, the Pope concludes this is not a miracle. Randy, upon hearing this, immediately declares himself powerless again. The other recovering alcoholics in the room follow suit and rush to the bar. And the miracle was fake. Therefore, they are sick again. Therefore, they have no control. Stan catches up to his father outside, and in the final minutes of the episode, he delivers a speech that functions as the show's first real thesis statement about addiction. He tells Randy that if God did not heal him, then Randy must have stopped drinking on his own, which means Randy has the power to control this, which means the AA model of total powerlessness is wrong. But Stan does not stop there. He adds something that makes the argument more complicated and more honest than a simple rejection of AA. He tells his father that completely avoiding alcohol, making a vow to never drink again, would still mean that drinking is controlling his life. Avoidance is its own kind of obsession. The answer is not surrender, and it is not abstinence. The answer is moderation, learning to live with the thing that tempts you without being consumed by it. Randy gives Stan a piggyback ride home. The sun sets behind them. It is one of the most sincerely felt endings in the show's history. A father and a son walking home together, having arrived at something true about what it means to live with a need you cannot eliminate but might, with enough discipline, learn to manage. The episode aired and immediately became one of the most controversial in the show's history. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights demanded an apology and called for the episode to be permanently retired and never released on DVD. Joseph Califano Jr., a board member of Viacom, which owns Comedy Central, called the episode an appalling and disgusting portrayal of the Virgin Mary. Bishop William Skylstad, president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, wrote a letter to Viacom's CEO accusing the network of extreme insensitivity. Comedy Central pulled the episode from its December 28, 2005 rerun marathon of Season 9. When the episode later aired in the United Kingdom, Channel 4 drew 6 times its normal South Park audience, 210,000 viewers, because the controversy had generated enough publicity to make people curious about what they were not supposed to see. All of that noise, every press release and boycott threat and letter from a bishop, was about the bleeding statue. Almost none of it was about what the episode actually said. The show's first and clearest statement about addiction, delivered by a 9-year-old boy to his drunk father on a sidewalk at sunset, was buried under a religious controversy so loud that the argument underneath it went almost entirely unheard. South Park said something real in 2005. It said that addiction is not a disease you surrender to. It is a challenge you manage through discipline and moderation. It said this through Stan Marsh, the character the show trusts most to tell the truth. And then it spent the next 20 years testing whether it actually believed what it said. First test came not from Randy, but from the most unlikely character in the entire show. A talking towel with a catchphrase that doubled as a confession. A character designed to be the most irritating, most disposable joke South Park had ever created. A character who, against all expectations and certainly against the original intentions of the writers, became the show's most honest and most devastating portrait of what addiction looks like when there is nothing left to lose. His name is Towelie, and the story he carries across 25 years of South Park is not a joke. It is a tragedy that the show keeps dressing up as one. Towelie was introduced in the 5th season of South Park in an episode titled Simply Towelie. It aired in 2001. He is a talking towel, a genetically engineered, sentient piece of terry cloth created by a shadowy government agency for reasons the show never fully bothers to explain. His first appearance on screen involves him interrupting the boys while they are trying to play a video game. He walks in, reminds them to bring a towel if they're going swimming, pauses, and then asks the question that will follow him for the next quarter century. "You want to get high?" If the boys say no, Towelie leaves, and the joke, at least in that first episode, is entirely about how annoying he is. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said publicly that Towelie was designed to be the worst, most irritating character they could possibly create. The show even ran fake merchandise ads during the episode, selling shirts that said, "I love Towelie," and shirts that said, "I hate Towelie," as though the writers were actively daring the audience to have an opinion about a character they considered disposable. The towel shirt commercials were a joke about how television creates merchandising opportunities out of even the laziest characters. The character himself was a joke about how every animated show eventually introduces a new sidekick designed to sell toys. Towelie was not supposed to matter. He was supposed to appear or irritate everyone and be forgotten. He was not forgotten. And the reason he was not forgotten is that somewhere between the first appearance and the episodes that followed, the writers realized they had accidentally built something they had not intended. A character whose catchphrase was not just a drug reference, but a genuine window into what compulsive substance use looks like from the inside. Towelie does not ask if you want to get high the way a person at a party offers you a drink. He asks it the way a person who's always thinking about getting high asks it. The question is not social, it is reflexive. It is the sound of a mind that has organized itself entirely around one thing and cannot stop returning to it, no matter what else is happening in the room. Across the early seasons, Towelie functions mostly as a running gag. He shows up, he is high, he is useless, the boys are annoyed by him, and the episode moves on. The show does not treat his drug use as a problem that needs solving. It treats it as background noise, the same way it treats Randy's drinking as background noise. The substance is just part of who the character is. Nobody stages an intervention, nobody has a conversation about it. The towel gets high and the show continues. Then the show changed what it was willing to show. Season 10, Episode 5, called A Million Little Fibers, aired in 2006. The title is a reference to the James Fry memoir controversy that was dominating the news at the time. In the episode, Towelie is working at a restaurant called P.F. Chang's. He is high. He is too busy mixing sauce to serve customers. He is fired, walking down the street afterward, jobless, and aware that he cannot pay rent. He has a conversation with himself about whether getting high will help him think of a solution. He knows that getting high usually causes problems. He also knows or believes that getting high makes him smarter. He gets high. He writes an autobiography called A Million Little Fibers. No publisher wants it because it is a book written by a towel. He crosses out every use of the word towel and replaces it with person. He puts on a fake mustache and calls himself Stephen McTowelie. The book becomes a bestseller. The episode plays this for comedy and the comedy works. But underneath the Oprah parody and the talking body parts and all the absurdist machinery the episode uses to fill its 22 minutes, there is something specific happening with Towelie. He is a character who cannot hold a job because of his drug use, who lies about his identity to achieve success, and whose brief moment of public recognition is built entirely on a foundation of deception. He is using, in every sense of the word, using drugs, using a fake name, using the publishing industry's inability to look past his disguise. And when the truth comes out, as it always does in South Park, the structure collapses and Towelie is right back where he started, jobless, high, lying to himself about what comes next. The show did not acknowledge any of this out loud. It told a satire about James Frey and moved on. But it posited the image into the show's history, the image of a character who cannot function in the world without chemicals, and who builds temporary structures of success that his addiction inevitably undermines. And that image stayed. 4 years later, the show returned to Towelie and did something it almost never does with its comedy characters. It stopped laughing. Season 14, Episode 3 is called Crippled Summer. It aired in 2010. The episode opens with a title card that reads Intervention and a disclaimer from Trey Parker himself, warning viewers about what they are about to see. The framing is a direct parody of the reality television show Intervention, which follows real families as they confront loved ones about addiction and attempt to get them into treatment. Within that framing, the show reveals what has happened to Towelie since his last significant appearance. His addictions to weed, crack, and crystal meth have worsened steadily to the point where he has begun victimizing his friends and prostituting himself for drug money. His relationship with his girlfriend is over. He has a newborn son named Washcloth. He has lost custody. The boys have gotten him a job at Lake Titicaca, a summer camp for disabled children, drying off the kids after they swim. It is the simplest job imaginable for a towel. He cannot do it. He disappears into the woods 14 times in a single day to get high. He is reprimanded over and over. Then he is fired after the counselors discover he has been performing sexual acts on an old man in the sports shed in exchange for money to buy more drugs. Read that again and sit with it for a moment. The show depicts a character who is selling his body to a stranger in a shed at a children's camp because he needs money for drugs. This is happening in a comedy. This is happening to a character who is introduced as a joke about towels. The show uses the absurdity of the character as permission to go further than it would go with a human character. Because Towelie is a towel, because his existence is inherently ridiculous, the writers can show the full scope of what late-stage addiction looks like without the audience recoiling in the way they might if these things were happening to Stan or Kyle or even Randy. The absurdity is the container. The truth inside the container is real. After Towelie is fired, he can no longer afford drugs. He begins huffing computer dusters. The high he gets from the compressed air leads him to wander around singing the words, "Walking on sunshine at the top of his lungs." The image of a towel stumbling through the woods, eyes glazed, singing an 80s pop song while inhaling chemicals from an aerosol can is funny in the way that South Park is funny, which is to say it works on your face while it does something else entirely to your stomach. The boys decide to stage an intervention. They bring in a therapist. They sit in a circle. Butters reads a prepared statement about how Towelie's behavior has affected him. Kyle reads his, then it is Cartman's turn, and Cartman uses the television appearance as a vehicle to read a lengthy hate speech targeting Jewish people, directed primarily at Kyle. This goes on for pages. The intervention is hijacked by Cartman's bigotry, which is the show doing what the show always does, using one character's worst impulse to derail a moment that was building towards something genuine. When Cartman finally finishes, and Stan delivers his much shorter statement about Towelie, Towelie refuses to go to rehab. He says he does not need help. He says he is fine. He says the things that people who are not fine say when the room is staring at them and the silence is too heavy to sit inside without reaching for something, anything, that lets them avoid the weight of what everyone in the circle already knows. Then Butters brings out Washcloth, Towelie's son, a small towel, presumably an infant, presented to his father at the moment of his lowest point. Towelie looks at his child and agrees to go to rehab. The scene works. It works because the show let it work. It did not cut away from the moment. It did not undermine it with a gag, at least not at the precise second when Towelie sees his son and changes his mind. For a beat, maybe 2 beats, the show trusts the emotional reality of what it is depicting. A parent who has destroyed his life with substances seeing the one thing that might be worth getting clean for. a child who does not know yet what his father has become. Towelie goes to rehab. The show moves on to the B-plot about Jimmy and Timmy at the summer camp. The intervention story is not revisited in a meaningful way within the episode, but the image of Towelie wrecked and broke and selling himself to strangers, looking at his son and deciding to try, sits inside the show's history alongside all the other images. Randy in the wheelchair, Stan on the sidewalk delivering his speech about moderation, and now Towelie on a folding chair in an intervention circle, being shown the face of the one person he might not be willing to lose. What happens to Towelie after the intervention is what happens to most characters in South Park after their crisis episodes. The reset kicks in. He reappears in later seasons without the rehab being referenced. He is back to using. He works at Tegrity Farms for Randy, starting in season 22, getting high on the marijuana he is supposed to be quality testing. His addiction is once again treated as a character trait rather than a crisis, but the trajectory from season 5 to season 27 tells a story that the individual episodes do not announce. Towelie goes from a one-note joke in 2001 to a prostitute huffing computer dusters in 2010 to a business partner in a marijuana empire in 2018 too. Finally, in season 27's episode Sycophancy, a literal rag. Randy, needing a gift for a trip to Washington, D.C., offers Towelie to the President of the United States as a towel, not as a person, not as a friend, as a product. Towelie ends the episode hanging on a wall in the White House, covered in filth, weakly saying he wants to get out. The character who was designed to be disposable became, across 25 years, the show's most complete portrait of what addiction does when nobody intervenes in a way that sticks. Towelie has been through intervention, he has been through rehab, he has had moments of clarity, he has seen his son, none of it held. The reset brought him back every time, and every time it brought him back, he was a little worse than before. The huffing in season 14 was worse than the weed in season 5. The total degradation in season 27 was worse than the huffing. The show never connected these dots out loud. It never had a character say, look at what has happened to Towelie over the last 2 decades. It just showed you season by season what the arc of unaddressed addiction looks like when it plays out over a long enough timeline. And it dressed the whole thing in the body of a towel so you would laugh instead of flinch. But the laughing and the flinching are not opposites. They are both responses to the same thing. And the thing they are both responding to is the recognition that Towelie's story, underneath the absurdity and the catchphrases and the computer dusters, is the story of a person who was never given the sustained help he needed because the world around him kept treating his problem as a personality trait instead of a crisis. The boys got him to rehab once, nobody followed up. Randy hired him and put him in direct contact with the substance he was addicted to. The show itself kept resetting him to 0 because the format required it. Towelie is the character South Park uses to show what full, unchecked addiction looks like when there are no limits on the descent, and the fact that he is a towel does not soften what the show depicted, it sharpens it. Because if you can see the tragedy in a cartoon towel huffing compressed air at a summer camp, then you can see it anywhere. The container is absurd. What is inside the container is not. The show built Towelie's arc on instinct, not design. Parker and Stone did not sit down in 2001 and plan a 25-year addiction narrative for a talking towel. They wrote what felt true in each episode and moved on. But the accumulated weight of those choices, the prostitution, and the huffing, the lost child, the final image of a towel hanging on a wall begging for help, adds up to something the writers never had to state because the work stated it for them. Some people do not get better. Some people go to rehab and come back, and go to rehab and come back, and each time they come back, they are further from where they started. The world around them stops taking the problem seriously because the problem has been there so long it starts to look like furniture. Towelie's drug use looks like furniture by season 22. It is just part of the room. Nobody comments on it. Nobody tries to change it. and the towel keeps getting high because that is what the towel does. But there is another character in South Park who carries addiction differently. Not as destruction, but as inheritance. A boy who watches his father drink and his grandfather gamble, and who discovers in the 18th season that the thing running through his family's blood is running through his too. And the way the show handles that discovery, the specific person it sends to explain it to him, is one of the strangest and most honest choices the writers ever made. The Marsh family has a problem with wanting things too much. This is not a reading of the show. This is something the show states directly in plain language through multiple characters across multiple seasons. Grandpa Marvin Marsh is a compulsive gambler. Randy Marsh is an alcoholic who denies being an alcoholic. And Stan Marsh, the boy who stood on a sidewalk in season 9 and told his father that the answer to addiction was moderation, undiscovers in season 18 that the thing he warned his father about is living inside him too. Season 18, episode 6 of South Park is called Premium Isn't Free. It aired on November 5th, 2014. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It is the 253rd episode of the series overall, and it was nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 67th Primetime Emmy Awards. The title is a play on the word freemium, the business model where a product is offered for free but charges money for additional features. The episode uses this model as a vehicle to talk about something much larger than mobile games. It uses it to draw a line from grandfather to father to son. They're connecting 3 generations of a family through a shared inability to stop reaching for the thing in front of them. The episode begins at South Park Elementary, where Jimmy Valmer approaches Kyle with exaggerated enthusiasm about a new Terrence and Philip mobile game. The enthusiasm is forced. Jimmy sounds like he's reading from a script, which he is. The game is called Terrence and Philip Give Us Your Money, a name so transparently predatory that it functions as both a joke and a warning. Kyle downloads it. So does Stan, and while Kyle and Cartman quickly recognize the game for what it is, barely functional and designed to extract cash through microtransactions, Stan cannot stop playing. He spends $489 on in-game currency. His parents ground him. Randy, who is drinking while lecturing Stan about responsibility, blames the spending on what he calls demons inherited from Stan's grandfather. Sharon Marsh points out that Randy himself might have inherited some of those same traits, specifically with alcohol. Randy denies this with a line that deserves to be quoted because it tells you everything you need to know about how he understands his own relationship with substances. He says it is not drinking. He says it is called white Zinfandel sipping sprint, and it is competitive. He says he is not chugging beer, but sampling a flight of gluten-free German lagers with a French wine pairing. He calls it a smorgaswein and insists it is elegantly cultural. The show is doing something precise here. Randy's denials are not just jokes. They are the specific vocabulary of a person who has constructed an elaborate linguistic framework around their substance use so that it never has to be called what it is. Randy does not drink. He samples. He does not get drunk. He competes. Every word he uses is designed to place distance between himself and the label he cannot accept. And the show trusts the audience to hear the gap between what Randy is saying and what Randy is doing. Stan's spending escalates. He skips school. He spends $26,000 on the game. Randy takes him to see Grandpa Marvin at the Three Feathers Indian Casino, where Marvin is visibly addicted to slot machines. Randy shows Stan this as a cautionary tale, pointing at Marvin and saying, "Look, this is what addiction looks like. This is what you are becoming." And Marvin, without missing a beat, brings up Randy's alcoholism. Randy denies it again. Stan and Marvin agree to quit their respective habits together. And the camera holds on Randy long enough for the audience to understand that the person delivering the lecture about addiction is the one most deeply in denial about his own. Jimmy confesses that he never actually played the Terrence and Philip game. He was paid to push it onto other kids, functioning as a dealer in the classic sense. Someone who distributes a product he does not use because the money is too good to refuse. Jimmy's role as a pusher is the show drawing a direct parallel between the freemium game industry and drug distribution networks. The pusher targets vulnerable people. The pusher does not use the product himself. The pusher profits from the addiction of others. Stan tries to stop playing. He cannot. The game sends push notifications in the middle of the night, and the sound of the notification is enough to break his resolve. He gets out of bed, he picks up the phone, he spends more money. This is the show depicting addiction mechanics with specificity and accuracy, because what the freemium game is doing to Stan is exactly what addictive substances do to people who are genetically predisposed to compulsive behavior. The trigger appears, the craving fires, the rational mind, the part that knows this is a bad idea, loses to the part that cannot stop reaching. Jimmy, having recognized that Stan's problem is real, tells him to ask a higher power for help. This is a reference to the 12-step model that the show savaged in Bloody Mary 9 years earlier. Stan is the same boy who rejected the idea of a higher power when his father was using it as an excuse, is now desperate enough to try it himself. He prays. Satan appears, not as a villain, not as a tempter, not as the embodiment of evil. Satan appears in Stan's bedroom as a patient, empathetic teacher who sits down on the bed and explains the science of addiction in language a child can understand. This is one of the most deliberately strange choices South Park has ever made, and it is worth sitting with because it tells you something important about what the show believes about where real knowledge comes from. Satan explains dopamine. He explains that dopamine is the chemical released in the brain when a person does something pleasurable, like eating or surviving a dangerous situation. He explains that in nature, and this system works because pleasurable experiences are rare, and the dopamine reward encourages the organism to repeat behaviors that keep it alive. But humans have evolved past the point where pleasurable experiences are rare. Humans have access to whatever they want, whenever they want it. And when a person overstimulates the dopamine system, the system breaks. The brain needs more and more of the stimulus to produce the same reward. The threshold rises, the baseline drops. The person is not weak. The person is not broken. The person's brain chemistry has been altered by repetition in a way that makes stopping genuinely, physiologically difficult. Critics and reviewers who covered this episode noted that Satan's explanation is largely scientifically accurate. The show did its homework. Parker and Stone have said in DVD commentary that they did extensive research into freemium game psychology before writing the episode, originally because they had been pitched on creating a South Park freemium game themselves and found the business model, in their words, pretty offensive. The research they did for that business decision became the foundation for an episode that uses the literal devil as the most honest and reliable source of information in the room. Satan then turns to genetics. He tells Stan that the genes he inherited from his father make him more likely to have trouble with dopamine regulation, which is why he needs to watch out for addictive things. This is the show drawing the line from Marvin to Randy to Stan in explicit scientific terms. The addiction is a biological predisposition that runs through the family like eye color or height, and the only defense against it is awareness. The show frames it this way deliberately. There is no moral judgment in Satan's explanation. There is only biology. But Satan adds something else. He makes a distinction that becomes the central argument of the episode. He tells Stan that if something is addictive because it is fun, that is one thing. But the Terrence and Philip game is not fun. It is blatant Skinner box manipulation. The game is not designed to provide pleasure. It is designed to exploit the dopamine system through intermittent reward schedules, the same mechanism that makes slot machines effective. The game does not offer Stan a good experience. It offers him a trigger followed by a false reward followed by another trigger, and the loop continues until the money runs out. This distinction matters because it is the show separating two very different things that get collapsed together in most conversations about addiction. There are substances and experiences that are genuinely pleasurable, that offer real enjoyment, and that become problematic only when a person with a vulnerable dopamine system consumes too much of them. And then there are systems designed from the ground up to exploit that vulnerability for profit. The first category includes alcohol, marijuana, and most recreational drugs. The second category includes freemium games, slot machines, and any system that uses Skinner box mechanics to extract money from people who cannot stop reaching for the button. The show's anger in this episode is directed entirely at the systems that target people like the Marsh family. Not at Stan for being weak, not at Randy for being an alcoholic, not at Grandpa Marvin for gambling. The Canadian government, which in the show's mythology is behind the freemium game, is building its economy on the exploitation of addicts. The episode includes a fake alcohol commercial that shows attractive people having a wonderful time with drinks in their hands, followed by a tiny disclaimer telling viewers to drink responsibly. The commercial is the show's way of pointing at an industry that profits from the same vulnerability the freemium games exploit, wrapping its exploitation in a disclaimer so thin it functions as a parody of itself. The episode's villain is eventually revealed to be Beelzebut, the Canadian devil, a portmanteau of Beelzebub and the Canadian pronunciation of about. He is the architect of the freemium system, a demon who has built an entire economy around tempting vulnerable people into spending money they do not have on experiences that were never designed to be enjoyable. Satan recognizes Beelzebub's work immediately. He says the game lacks nuance, which is an insult from one devil to another, the equivalent of a master criminal critiquing a mugger's technique. Satan asked to borrow Stan's soul. Stan agrees. Satan possesses Stan's body, travels to Canada, and defeats Beelzebub in a fight that destroys a Canadian server infrastructure. Stan rises from the ground in the middle of a basketball game. Kyle asks if he is okay. Stan says he is fine. He walks away. The moment is played with deliberate casualness, and the boys reacting to their friend literally ascending from hell with the same mild interest they would give to someone arriving late from the bathroom. The episode ends with Stan and Grandpa Marvin playing board games together. They are keeping each other clean. They have found a non-addictive activity to share, something that does not trigger the dopamine system the way slot machines and freemium games do. The scene is quiet. It is gentle. It is two members of the same family taking care of each other because they understand that the thing running through their blood requires vigilance. Then Randy walks in. He looks at the board game. He asks if they want to put money on it. Stan drops his head onto the table. That ending is the episode's thesis compressed into a single gesture. Stan and Marvin are trying. They are aware of their vulnerability. They are making a genuine effort to manage the thing their genetics gave them. And Randy, the bridge between grandfather and grandson, the carrier who passed the gene from one generation to the next, walks into the room and immediately tries to introduce gambling into the one safe space they have built. He is not doing it maliciously. He is not even aware of what he's doing. He is just being Randy, which is to say he is being a man whose relationship with risk and reward and stimulation is so deeply embedded in his behavior that he cannot enter a room without trying to raise the stakes. The episode was nominated for an Emmy. It deserved the nomination, not because it was the funniest episode of the season, though it was funny, but because it was the most structurally ambitious thing the show had attempted with the subject of addiction since Bloody Mary. It connected 3 generations. It used Satan as a biology teacher. It drew a clear line between personal vulnerability and systemic exploitation. And it ended with an image of a father undermining his son's recovery without even knowing he was doing it, which is one of the truest things the show has ever put on screen about how addiction moves through families. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What freemium isn't free established through science and family history, the next chapter of South Park's addiction story was about to explore through something much larger and much stranger. Because in 2018, Randy Marsh did not just pick up a bottle. He moved his entire family to a farm, started a marijuana empire, and spent the next 7 years becoming the main character of a show that was supposed to be about children. And what happened to South Park during those 7 years mirrors what happens to any family that organizes itself around one person's obsession. The show lost itself inside Randy's addiction, and it took until 2025 to find its way back. Season 22, Episode 4 of South Park is called Tegrity Farms. It aired on October 17th, 2018. It is the 291st episode of the series overall. Jesse Shetting at IGN rated it 9.2 out of 10 and called it easily one of the best South Park episodes in several years. And it begins with Randy Marsh convincing his wife Sharon to sell their home and move the entire family to a cannabis farm outside of town. The premise was rooted in something real. Colorado, the state where South Park is set, had legalized recreational marijuana in 2012. By 2018, the cannabis industry in Colorado was a multi-billion-dollar business, and the culture around it had shifted from counterculture rebellion to mainstream commerce. Parker and Stone, who live in Colorado, watched this happen in real time. And what they saw was not just a drug being legalized. They saw a man like Randy Marsh, a man who wraps every impulse in the language of moral superiority, finding the perfect vehicle for his next obsession. Randy names the farm Tegrity Farms. The name is a portmanteau of integrity and the specific way Randy pronounces things when he is performing sincerity. He tells everyone who will listen that his farm has tegrity, that his marijuana is grown with values, that he is different from the corporate weed companies because he cares about quality and community. None of this is true in any way that survives contact with Randy's actual behavior, but the name sticks and it becomes the brand. And the brand becomes Randy's entire identity for the next 7 years of the show. His family hates the farm from the beginning. Stan does not want to live there. Shelley does not want to live there. Sharon tolerates it for a while and then stops tolerating it. The show makes their displeasure clear in every episode that features the farm. The children of the Marsh family are trapped in their father's obsession, unable to escape it because the farm is where they live. And the farm is what Randy cares about, and Randy's caring about the farm has replaced his caring about anything else. This is how the show depicts what happens when a substance does not just consume the user, but consumes the family. The Tegrity Farms arc is not about Randy getting high, though he does get high. It is about Randy reorganizing his entire life, his family's entire life, around a substance. The marijuana is not the problem in the way that beer was the problem in Bloody Mary. The marijuana is the excuse. It is the vehicle through which Randy pursues something deeper, which is the need to be important, to be the center of attention, or to be the person everyone in town has to deal with whether they want to or not. The farm grows across multiple seasons. In the 23rd season, Randy tries to expand his business to China. The episode is called Banned in China, and it aired in 2019. Randy travels to China with his marijuana, unaware that drugs are illegal there, and ends up in a Chinese prison where he shares a cell with Winnie the Pooh. He eventually makes a deal with the Chinese government to sell his product internationally, but the deal requires him to kill Winnie the Pooh, which he does. The episode triggered a blanket ban of the entire South Park franchise in China. Every episode, every clip, every search term related to the show was scrubbed from Baidu, Douban, Jihu, Bilibili, Sina Weibo, and WeChat. But Parker and Stone responded to the ban with a mock apology that read, in part, like the band Chicago, "We too love money more than freedom and democracy." The apology was itself a joke, but the episode that triggered it was making a real point about what happens when a person whose identity is organized around a product will do anything, including compromising their stated values to expand their market. Randy said his farm had tegrity. Then he killed a cartoon bear in a Chinese prison to close a business deal. The gap between the brand and the behavior is the gap the show has been pointing at since it first put a beer can in Randy's hand. The 23rd season pushed the Tegrity storyline further than anyone expected. In the Christmas episode titled Christmas Snow, the adults of South Park lose their holiday spirit after a law is passed banning alcohol sales until January 2nd. The mayor asks Randy to provide marijuana for the holidays. Randy, whose supply cannot grow in winter, creates a new product by mixing old batches of marijuana together and topping them with cocaine. He calls it Christmas Snow. The town gets high. When Santa discovers what is happening and bans marijuana, Randy creates a variant called Marijuana Free Christmas Snow, which is just cocaine without the marijuana. Santa tries the cocaine. Jesus tries the cocaine. Both approve. The season ends with cocaine falling from the sky and an advertisement for Tegrity cocaine endorsed by Santa Claus himself. This is the Tegrity arc at its most absurd and at its most pointed. Randy started with marijuana, a substance the show and much of the audience consider relatively benign. He escalated to cocaine because the market demanded it. The escalation is played as comedy, and the comedy is effective, but the structure underneath the comedy is the structure of addiction itself. A person starts with something manageable. The manageable thing stops being enough. The person escalates. The escalation produces a brief period of success. The success requires further escalation. The cycle continues until the substance being sold or used no longer resembles what the person started with. Randy began growing marijuana on a farm. He ended the 23rd season manufacturing cocaine and having it endorsed by Jesus Christ. The distance between those 2 points is the distance the show traveled in a single season, and it mirrors the distance that addiction travels when it is left unchecked. The Tegrity Farms arc continued through the Paramount Plus specials through seasons 24, 25, and 26, and into season 27. It became the longest-running storyline in the show's history, and somewhere around the 3rd or 4th year, the audience turned on it. Fans who had watched the show since the late 90s began saying publicly that the Tegrity storyline had overstayed its welcome, that the show was spending too much time on Randy and not enough on the children, that the marijuana farm had consumed South Park the way it had consumed the Marsh family. The show heard this, and it responded in a way that was either brilliantly self-aware or deeply ironic, depending on how much credit you want to give the writers. In the Streaming Wars specials, Randy essentially breaks the fourth wall to acknowledge that the Tegrity focus has gone too far. The show's own characters recognize that the storyline has taken over, that the balance is wrong, that something needs to change. And then the show continues doing it anyway. The farm stays. Randy stays on the farm. The specials continue to center his marijuana business. This is the show enacting, at the structural level, the same pattern it depicts in its addiction episodes. The show knows the Tegrity storyline is a problem. The show says out loud that it knows. And then the show cannot stop. Not because the writers are addicted to the storyline in any clinical sense, but because the machinery of production, the deals with Paramount, the established character dynamics, the audience that still watches even while complaining, all of it creates a momentum that resists change. The same way a person's daily habits resist the disruption of quitting a substance. Season 27, Episode 3 is called Sycophancy. It aired in August 2025, and it was the episode that finally ended the Tegrity Farms arc. In it, Randy's farm is raided by ICE agents who deport all of his Mexican workers. Facing bankruptcy, Randy turns to ChatGPT for advice while microdosing ketamine. He tries to rebrand the farm as an AI-powered marijuana platform. He sends Towelie to Washington, D.C. as a gift for the president. He spirals, and eventually Sharon convinces him that the farm is over. There is no scheme that can save it. The money is gone. The dream, if it ever was one, is finished. Randy and Sharon pack up the empty farmhouse. Randy looks around at the space where his empire existed. He closes the door behind him. The show plays this with a sincerity it rarely allows itself. A man walking away from the thing that defined him for 7 years. Not because he conquered it, not because he had a moment of clarity in which the moral cost became too great, because it ran out, the money ran out, the workers were taken, the market moved on. The substance, in this case the business built around a substance, simply stopped being viable. Screen Rant, Collider, and Slash Film all covered the end of the Tegrity arc, and the fan response was overwhelmingly positive. People were relieved. The storyline that had consumed the show for 7 years was finally over, and the show could return to its original focus on the children and on the small-scale absurdity that made it famous. But sit with that ending for a moment. Randy did not quit because he learned something. He did not quit because his family's suffering finally broke through his obsession. He quit because the business failed. The external circumstances changed, and the substance, meaning the farm and everything it represented, was no longer available to him. This is not recovery. This is the supply running out. And the show, whether intentionally or not, depicted the end of its longest-running addiction storyline in exactly the way most addiction stories actually end in real life. Not with a speech, not with a moment of moral clarity, with the substance simply becoming unavailable, and the person being forced to move on not because they chose to, but because they had no other option. The Tegrity Farms arc, taken as a whole, is South Park's most ambitious and most frustrating exploration of how addiction works at scale. It depicts a man who reorganized his entire life around a substance, who dragged his family into his obsession, who escalated from marijuana to cocaine to ketamine over the course of 7 years, and who never once acknowledged that what he was doing had a name. Randy Marsh never used the word addiction to describe his relationship with the farm. He never connected his behavior to the drinking that got him arrested in season 9 or the gambling that consumed his father in season 18. He just kept going, season after season, the way people who are caught inside a compulsion keep going. Not because they are stupid or weak, but because the compulsion has become so deeply embedded in their daily routine that removing it would require them to answer a question they are not ready to ask. Who am I without this? Randy closed the door on the empty farmhouse in 2025. The show moved on, but the question the farm left behind is the same question that every addiction story in South Park eventually arrives at. What happens when the thing that was filling the space is gone and the space is still there? Randy does not know. The show does not know. And that honesty, the willingness to close a 7-year arc without providing an answer, is more true to the experience of addiction than any clean resolution would have been. The farm is gone. The question remains. And the next character to face a version of that question is not an adult at all. It is a boy who discovers that the thing running through his family found its way into him earlier than anyone expected, through a substance no one in South Park took seriously until it was too late. Kenny McCormick is the poorest kid in South Park. His family lives in a house that is falling apart. His parents drink. His father is unemployed more often than he is employed. Kenny wears an orange parka that covers his face and muffles his voice so thoroughly that almost nothing he says is intelligible to the audience. He dies in nearly every episode of the first 5 seasons, a running gag that the show eventually retired, but that established something important about who Kenny is in the world of the show. He is the expendable one. The one whose suffering is played for laughs rather than sympathy. The one the show uses and discards and brings back without ceremony. Kenny's relationship with substances follows the same pattern. He gets high, he gets into trouble. The trouble is funny, the episode ends, nobody follows up. The show treats Kenny's substance use the way it treats his deaths, as a recurring event that carries no permanent weight, because the format will not allow permanence for this particular character. Season 12, Episode 3 of South Park is called Major Boobage. It aired in 2008. The title is a double meaning that works on two levels, one of which is about drugs and one of which is about anatomy. The episode begins with Mr. Mackey teaching the fourth graders about the dangers of choking oneself to get high, which is the kind of anti-drug presentation that schools give, and that South Park has been mocking since the show's first season. Kenny, hearing about a new way to get high for the first time, immediately tries it. When choking does not work, Butters mentions that you can get high off of cat urine. Mr. Mackey corrects him. It is not urine exactly, it is the highly concentrated liquid that cats produce when they spray their territory. The distinction matters to nobody in the room, but the show includes it anyway because South Park has always been interested in the gap between what adults say and what children hear. Kenny gets high off of Cartman's cat, Mr. Kitty. The high is not depicted as a fuzzy, pleasant experience. It is depicted as a full-blown psychedelic episode rendered in a completely different animation style. The show switches from its standard construction paper aesthetic to rotoscoping, a technique that traces over live action footage to create a fluid, dreamlike animation style. The specific style they are referencing is the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal, a cult classic known for its combination of science fiction, fantasy, and extensive nudity. Kenny enters a surreal world filled with breasts. He encounters a beautiful woman. The hallucination is vivid and consuming and bears almost no resemblance to the dingy, impoverished reality of Kenny's actual life, which is exactly the point. Kenny wants to go back. He wants to return to the hallucination the way a person who has tasted something extraordinary for the first time wants to taste it again. The show calls this practice cheesing because it is fun to do. A joke that works because the phrase sounds innocent enough to slide past censors while describing something that is genuinely dangerous. The headlines in South Park pick up the story. There is a town meeting. Gerald Broflovsky, Kyle's father, leads a campaign to ban cats from the town. A law is passed, cats are confiscated and removed from homes across South Park. And then the episode does something that elevates it beyond a standard drug scare parody. Gerald, the man who led the campaign to ban cats, is revealed to have been a cheeser himself in his younger years. He has personal experience with the substance, and when he finds himself alone with a confiscated cat in his basement, he cannot resist. He enters the same heavy metal hallucination world that Kenny entered. And when Kenny, who has been getting high off of all the cats Cartman hid in his attic, appears in the hallucination too, the two of them fight over the fantasy woman. In reality, they are wrestling in a sandbox in a public park while a crowd gathers to watch. The image is absurd. A grown man and a 9-year-old boy, both out of their minds on cat spray, rolling around in sand while hallucinating about a woman from a 1981 animated film. But the image is also precisely accurate about how addiction looks from the outside versus how it feels from the inside. From inside the hallucination, Gerald and Kenny are warriors competing for something magnificent. From outside, they are two people making spectacles of themselves in public, oblivious to how they appear, unable to stop even when an audience forms around them. Gerald, confronted with his own hypocrisy, reverses the cat ban. He acknowledges that cats are not the problem. People are the problem. The cats are reinstated. The episode ends with Kenny getting high off of flowers, which the boys describe as getting high on life, then getting really high on life, then getting super wasted on life. Kenny re-enters the heavy metal hallucination. He has found a new way to access the same experience, which is the show demonstrating in its final moments that the substance was never the point. The experience was the point. The substance was just the delivery mechanism. Remove one delivery mechanism and the person will find another. What makes Kenny's cheesing arc worth examining in the context of this larger conversation is what the show chooses not to do with it. It does not follow up. It does not explore what cheesing means for Kenny's development or his family situation or his already precarious life. The episode treats Kenny's drug use the way South Park treats everything about Kenny, as a disposable event in the life of a disposable character. And that choice, the choice to not treat Kenny's addiction with the same weight the show gives to Randy's or Towelie's, says something about whose addiction the show considers serious and whose it considers background noise. Kenny is poor. His parents are alcoholics. His home life is chaotic. He is, by any reasonable measure, the character most at risk for substance abuse based on the circumstances the show has established for him. And the show has consistently treated his substance use as less important, less worthy of sustained attention, much less deserving of an episode that sits with the weight of what it is depicting. Randy gets Bloody Mary and the intervention from death. Towelie gets Cripple Summer and the intervention with washcloth. Kenny gets major boobage and a return to normal by the next week. The same season that gave the audience major boobage also gave them an earlier episode in which Stan developed a different kind of addiction. Season 11, episode 13, is called Guitar Queer O. It aired in 2007, and it centers on Stan and Kyle playing Guitar Hero together. They are good at it. They achieve 1,000,000 points together and unlock a new level. The achievement attracts the attention of a manager named Charles, who offers to represent Stan as a professional Guitar Hero player. Stan is separated from Kyle. He is paired with a new partner named Thad. The pressure mounts, and in the middle of his preparation for a major performance, Stan discovers a new video game called Heroin Hero. The game has no score. It has no time limit. The player controls an avatar who runs through a landscape chasing a pink dragon. The dragon cannot be caught. The player injects virtual heroin to keep running. The game never ends. The dragon stays just out of reach forever. Stan becomes addicted to Heroin Hero. Not to heroin, to a game about heroin. The distinction is important because the show is using the game as a metaphor that functions at every level it needs to function at. Stan is chasing something he will never catch. The game is designed so that catching it is impossible. The pleasure comes not from achieving the goal, but from the pursuit of the goal, or from the sensation of running towards something that looks like it might be reachable if you just keep going a little longer. Charles finds Heroin Hero in Stan's bag. He lectures Stan about it. He tells him to pull himself together. Stan cannot. He falls asleep playing the game on the day of his big performance. Charles drags him to the arcade. Stan plays Guitar Hero in front of a crowd and fails badly because his focus has been consumed by the dragon chase. Everyone leaves. Stan is alone with a machine that is jeering at him. He goes back to the game store. The clerk offers him Rehab Hero, which is the inverse of Heroin Hero. Stan declines. He buys a calm racing game instead. And while playing it, he hears a song on the radio that reminds him of Kyle, and he realizes that what he lost was not the game or the career or the manager. It was the friendship. The thing that mattered was the person he played with, not the game he played. He goes to find Kyle. They reconcile. The episode ends with them playing together again. Guitar Queer O gives Stan the clean resolution that the show rarely offers its characters in addiction stories. He recognizes what he lost. He goes back to it. He is saved by a relationship, by the memory of a connection that existed before the substance arrived and that the substance displaced. It is a simpler story than Bloody Mary or Freemium Isn't Free, but it is making a specific point that connects to everything else the show has said about addiction. The substance fills a space. If the space was already occupied by something meaningful, the person has something to return to when the substance is removed. If the space was empty before the substance arrived, the person has nothing to go back to, which is why Towelie, who had nothing before the drugs, cannot stay clean, and why Randy, whose identity is organized entirely around his obsessions, cycles from one substance to the next without ever arriving at an endpoint. Stan had Kyle. That was enough. Kenny had a heavy metal fantasy world. That was not enough. But the show decided it did not need to explore why. And Jimmy Valmer, the next character in this sequence, had something that none of the others had. He had a moment of genuine clarity in which he saw what the substance was doing to him, admitted it in public, and walked away in a way that the show never undid. Jimmy got the ending, the only clean one the show has ever given to an addiction story. And what that ending looked like, and why it works, and why nobody else in South Park was ever allowed to have one like it, is worth understanding before we can see the full shape of what this show believes. Season 8, Episode 2 of South Park is called Up the Down Steroid. It aired in 2004. Jimmy Valmer and Timmy Birch, two disabled children, are preparing to compete in the Special Olympics in Denver. Jimmy is a stand-up comedian. He walks on crutches. He stutters. He is genuinely funny in a way the show takes care to demonstrate through actual jokes that land with actual audiences, both within the show and watching it. Jimmy is not presented as inspirational in the way television usually presents disabled characters. He is presented as competitive, talented, proud of his abilities, and capable of making choices that are as selfish and as short-sighted as any choice made by any able-bodied character on the show. Jimmy wants to win. He wants to win badly enough that when Nathan, another disabled boy, approaches him in a dark corner and offers him steroids, Jimmy takes them. Nathan assures Jimmy that these particular steroids cannot be detected in urine tests. Jimmy accepts this assurance without much hesitation, which is the show being honest about how the decision to use a performance-enhancing substance usually happens. It happens quickly. It happens in a moment of vulnerability. It happens because someone offers you a shortcut at the exact moment you're most desperate for one. The steroids work. Jimmy gets bigger. He gets stronger. He starts winning at everything. And then the steroids begin to do what steroids do to the person underneath the performance, which is change them in ways they did not agree to and cannot control. Jimmy's personality shifts. He becomes aggressive. He becomes paranoid. He becomes violent in a way that shocks the people around him because it comes from a person and they have never seen behave this way before. His girlfriend Nancy notices first. She sees that Jimmy is different from the person she knew before he started using. She tries to talk to him about it. Jimmy responds with rage. The relationship ends, then the violence escalates. Jimmy attacks Nancy. He attacks his own mother. The show scores these scenes with Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, one of the most recognizable and most emotionally devastating pieces of classical music in the Western canon. The piece was used in the film Platoon to accompany scenes of soldiers watching their friends die. It has been played at funerals, memorials, and moments of national grief. South Park uses it here not as a joke, not as an ironic counterpoint to the comedy happening elsewhere in the episode, but as a genuine emotional underscore for a scene depicting a disabled child destroying his relationships because of a substance he cannot stop using. The Adagio plays while Jimmy loses control. It plays while he cries. It plays while the audience watches a character they care about become someone they do not recognize. And the show does not cut away from it. It does not interrupt the moment with a gag or a B-plot transition. It lets the music and the violence and the confusion sit on screen for as long as the scene requires. This is South Park trusting its audience to feel something uncomfortable and not need the discomfort to be relieved immediately. The B-plot of the episode involves Cartman, who has decided to fake a disability in order to compete in the Special Olympics and win the $1,000 grand prize. Cartman's preparation is absurd and detailed. He reads books about disabilities. He rides a special education bus taking notes on how to convincingly perform cognitive impairment. He modifies his shoes. He puts on a bicycle helmet too tight so that his face deforms. He convinces his mother, Leanne, to sign him up by telling her he just wants to understand what disabled children face every day, a lie she accepts because Leanne accepts everything Cartman says. The parallel between Cartman and Jimmy is the structural engine of the episode. Both are cheating. Both are using dishonest means to gain an advantage in a competition designed for people with disabilities. But the show treats their cheating very differently. Cartman's cheating is external. He is pretending to be something he is not. Jimmy's cheating is internal. He has changed what he actually is through a chemical substance that has altered his body and his mind. The competition arrives. Cartman comes in last place because the actual Special Olympics competitors are in excellent physical condition, having trained intensively for the event, while Cartman has not. Jimmy wins first place. He stands on the podium with his medal. And then something happens that almost never happens in South Park. A character looks at what they have done, understands it fully, and chooses to do the right thing without being forced to by circumstances or other characters. Timmy, who discovered Jimmy's steroids earlier in the episode and tried unsuccessfully to tell someone about them, had been unable to communicate what he knew because his vocabulary is limited to 2 words, Timmy and Jimmy. The show uses Timmy's communication limitation not as a joke in this moment, but as a structural problem. The person who knew about the cheating could not tell anyone because the systems around him were not designed to hear what he was trying to say. Mr. Mackey, the school counselor, could not understand Timmy's attempt to report the steroid use. The information existed. The framework for receiving it did not. But Jimmy does not need to be caught. He looks at the medal around his neck. He looks at Timmy. He sees Cartman, who is about to beat him up for being a cheater, which is itself a profound irony since Cartman spent the entire episode cheating in a different way. And Jimmy walks to the microphone and delivers a speech. He tells the audience that taking steroids is cheating. He says it is the equivalent of pretending to be disabled in order to compete in the Special Olympics. He gives back his medal. The crowd applauds. The scene is played straight. There is no ironic undercut. There is no gag. Jimmy made a choice, owned it publicly, returned what he did not earn, and accepted the consequences. The episode ends with Cartman trying to convince the other boys that he was pretending to be disabled, specifically to teach Jimmy a lesson about steroids, a lie nobody believes. The boys walk away. Cartman tells them to grow up. This is the only addiction story in South Park that has a clean moral resolution. Jimmy stops using, he admits what he did, he returns the prize. He is not shown relapsing in subsequent episodes. The steroids are not mentioned again. The show allows Jimmy's arc to be complete, in a way it never allows for Randy or Towelie or Stan or Kenny. The episode has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the end is an end, not a pause before the next cycle. Why does Jimmy get this and nobody else does? Part of the answer is structural. Jimmy is not a main character. He appears in episodes regularly, but he does not carry storylines the way Randy does, or appear in every episode the way the 4 boys do. A resolved arc for Jimmy does not cost the show anything. The writers can let him learn his lesson and move on because they do not need him to remain in the same position for the next season to function. Randy cannot be allowed to get sober because Sober Randy is a different show. Towelie cannot be allowed to stay clean because Towelie's value to the show is partly his dysfunction. The main characters must remain available for next week's story, and availability requires the reset. But part of the answer is also about what the show believes about different kinds of addiction. Jimmy's steroid use is performance-based. He took the substance to win a competition. When the competition ended and the truth was acknowledged, the reason for using the substance disappeared. There was nothing underneath the steroid use except the desire to win. And once the desire to win was satisfied and the cost was visible, Jimmy could walk away. Compare that to Randy, whose drinking is not about any specific outcome. Randy does not drink to win something or achieve something or perform better at something. He drinks because being Randy is easier with alcohol in his system. The substance is not serving a goal, it is managing a state. And you cannot walk away from a state the way you can walk away from a goal, because the state is always there, waiting every morning, every evening, every moment the person is alone with themselves. Towelie cannot walk away for the same reason. His drug use is not about performance or achievement, it is about survival. Being a towel in a world that does not take you seriously, that uses you and discards you and forgets you exist until it needs you again, and is intolerable without something to dull the awareness of what you are. The drugs are not an escape from a problem. They are the management system for a condition that has no other treatment available. Jimmy's addiction had a purpose. When the purpose ended, the addiction ended. That is why the show gave him a clean resolution. The other characters are not that lucky because their addictions do not have purposes. They have voids. And voids do not end when a competition is over or a medal is returned. Voids continue because the thing creating them, the emptiness, the dissatisfaction, the gap between who the person is and who they want to be, does not have a finish line. The show never explains this distinction out loud. It simply shows you Jimmy walking away clean and Randy drinking again by the next episode and trusts you to see the difference. One addiction had a bottom that could be reached. The others do not. And the show has been circling that distinction for 28 seasons without ever quite finding the words to name it. What happens next in this analysis is the part where we stop looking at individual characters and start looking at the machine itself, because South Park is not just a show that tells addiction stories. It is a show whose own structure, whose 6-day production cycle, and episodic reset, and 28-year lifespan functions as a kind of addiction engine, producing the same patterns over and over, cycling through crisis and reset and return to baseline, unable to accumulate the consequences of its own most honest moments. The format is the habit. The episodes are the doses. And the question of whether the show will ever break the cycle is, at this point, the same question the show has been asking about Randy Marsh since 2005. South Park makes an episode in 6 days. This fact has been documented, celebrated, and used as a selling point for the show since the 2011 behind-the-scenes film 6 days to air followed the production of the season 15 premiere from blank page to broadcast. The process goes like this. On a Thursday, Trey Parker and Matt Stone sit in a room and start talking about what the episode will be about. By Friday, they have a rough script. Over the weekend and into the following week, the voice recording happens. The animation is assembled in Autodesk Maya software using a style that mimics the original construction paper cutouts. And the episode is delivered to Comedy Central in time for its Wednesday night airing. The entire cycle, from first idea to finished product, fits inside less than a week. This speed is what allows South Park to be topical. When a news story breaks on a Monday, an episode responding to it can air 2 days later. This is a capability no other scripted television show on Earth can match, and it gives South Park a relevance that shows with months-long production schedules cannot access. The writers are not guessing at what the audience is thinking about. They know because they are thinking about it at the same time, and the gap between the thought and the broadcast is so narrow that the show functions almost as real-time commentary. But this speed has a cost, and the cost is directly relevant to every addiction story the show has ever told. The 6-day cycle does not leave room for the kind of careful thematic planning that allows a show to build a sustained argument across multiple episodes. Each episode is written fresh. Each episode is a response to whatever is on the writer's minds that particular week. And each episode, with rare exceptions, must resolve its own story within 22 minutes because next week the cycle starts over and the show needs a clean slate. This means that every time South Park tells an addiction story, the story must fit inside a container that will be discarded by the following Wednesday. Randy can confront his alcoholism in Bloody Mary and arrive at a genuine insight about moderation, but by the next episode the insight is gone. And Randy is drinking normally because the new episode needs him available for whatever story it is telling. Towelie can go to rehab in Crippled Summer and choose to get clean for the sake of his son. But the rehab does not carry forward because the format has no mechanism for carrying things forward. Stan can learn about his genetic predisposition to addiction from Satan himself in Freemium Isn't Free. And by the next season, the lesson will not be referenced because the next season is starting from scratch. The episodic reset is not unique to South Park. The Simpsons does it, Family Guy does it. Almost every long-running animated comedy of this era does it. But South Park's reset has a specific effect on its addiction stories that other shows do not have to contend with, because South Park's addiction stories are more honest than most. When the show puts genuine emotion into an intervention scene or a conversation between father and son about the limits of willpower, the reset does not just erase a plot point, it erases a moral position. The show arrives at something true, holds it for 22 minutes, and then abandons it. The truth does not carry over, the insight does not accumulate. Every new addiction episode starts from the same baseline, as if nothing that came before it happened. Compare Bloody Mary in 2005 to Freemium Isn't Free in 2014 to the Tegrity Farms arc that began in 2018. All three are about Randy's relationship with substances. All three arrive at some version of the same observation that Randy cannot stop, that his family is affected, that the behavior has consequences. But the 2014 episode does not build on the 2005 episode. The 2018 arc does not build on either of them. Each one is its own self-contained argument, complete with its own setup and its own resolution and its own moral, and none of them acknowledges that the show has been here before. This is what the episodic format does to addiction stories. It prevents accumulation. And because it prevents accumulation, it prevents the kind of slow burn reckoning that real addiction produces in real families. In real life, the consequences stack up. The DUI from 2005 is still on the record when the intervention happens in 2014. The family's memory of the farm in 2018 includes every previous failure and broken promise. The past is present, the weight compounds. The person who has been drinking for 20 years is not in the same position as the person who just started, but because 20 years of consequences are sitting on their shoulders. In South Park, the consequences evaporate between episodes. Randy, at the start of season 23, does not carry the weight of Bloody Mary on his back. He is not a man who got a DUI and went to AA and was visited by a bleeding statue and learned about moderation and then failed to moderate. He is just Randy, fresh Randy, ready for this week's story. And that freshness, that perpetual return to zero, is the show's version of the reset that addiction itself relies on. I will start fresh tomorrow. I will be different next week. The cycle begins again, and the person inside it convinces themselves that the new beginning is real, that this time will be different, that the past can be left behind. The format enables the same delusion. The Tegrity Farms arc was the one time the show broke this pattern. For 7 consecutive years, the show maintained a storyline that accumulated consequences. Randy's marijuana business affected his family across multiple seasons. Stan's resentment grew. Sharon's patience eroded. The farm's failures and escalations were referenced from one episode to the next. For the first time in the show's history, the past was present. The weight compounded, and the audience hated it. Not all of the audience, but enough of it that the backlash became a story in itself. Fans posted online about their frustration with the Tegrity focus. Critics noted that the show had lost its way. The complaint was consistent and specific. The show was spending too much time on Randy and not enough on the children who were supposed to be the center of it. The sustained narrative that the audience said they wanted, the serialization, the continuity, the consequences that accumulated, turned out to be less enjoyable than the episodic format it replaced. There is something instructive about this. The audience, when given the version of South Park that treated addiction with sustained attention and allowed consequences to compound across seasons, preferred the version where consequences evaporated every week. The serialized version was more honest. The episodic version was more comfortable. And the show, after 7 years of trying to be honest, went back to being comfortable in season 27 when it closed the Tegrity arc and returned to its default mode of operation. This is the show doing what Randy does. It knows the habit is not serving it. It tries to change. The change is difficult and uncomfortable and produces a version of the show that nobody, including the creators themselves, fully likes. So the show goes back to what it knows. The reset returns, the slate is wiped. And next Wednesday, everything starts over. The 6-day production cycle is not just how South Park is made. It is a structural metaphor for the cycle the show depicts in its characters. Write, produce, broadcast, reset, drink, regret, promise, drink, use, crash, try to quit, use. The rhythm is the same, the speed is different. But the pattern, the endless return to the starting position after each episode of Clarity is identical. This does not make South Park a bad show. It makes South Park a show that is structurally incapable of doing the one thing its addiction stories keep asking it to do, which is let the consequences accumulate long enough for them to matter. The show can visit addiction, it can say true things about it, it can produce moments of genuine emotional weight. But it cannot sustain those moments past the end credits because the machine that produces the show requires the reset, the way Randy requires the bar. Both need to start fresh. Both depend on the forgetting. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And what remains after all of these episodes and all of these characters and all of these resets is the question of what it all adds up to. Because when you take every addiction story South Park has told across 28 seasons and line them up next to each other, as a pattern emerges that none of the individual episodes were trying to create. A set of beliefs about substances and dependency and what it means to live with a need you cannot eliminate becomes visible underneath the comedy. The show has been making an argument since 2005. It has never stated the argument directly. It has never put it in a character's mouth as a single, clean thesis. But the argument is there. And once you see it, the whole series looks different. Here is what South Park believes about addiction. The show has never said any of this out loud. It has never had a character deliver it as a monologue or a narrator summarize it over the closing credits. But run every addiction episode the show has produced through the same filter, and every single one of them fits the same shape. The shape has 5 sides, 5 beliefs that the show holds consistently across 28 seasons, contradicting itself on the surface while remaining remarkably stable underneath. The first belief is that addiction is inherited. The Marsh family bloodline is the show's primary evidence for this position. Grandpa Marvin is a compulsive gambler. Randy is an alcoholic who hides behind elaborate language to avoid using the word. Stan is a compulsive spender who cannot stop playing a game he knows is exploiting him. The show draws this line explicitly in Freemium Isn't Free, when Satan explains to Stan that the genes he got from his father make him more likely to have trouble with dopamine regulation. The line runs in one direction, from grandfather to father to son. Each generation carries the vulnerability forward, and each generation encounters a different substance that triggers it. Marvin found slot machines, Randy found alcohol, Stan found a mobile game. The substance changes, the vulnerability stays. The show does not present this inheritance as a curse or a condemnation. It presents it as a biological fact that requires awareness. Stan does not learn from Satan that he is doomed. He learns that he needs to watch out for addictive things. The framing is preventive, not fatalistic. You have this in your blood, now you know, now you can be careful. Whether Stan succeeds in being careful is a different question, and the show's answer to that question changes depending on which episode you are watching. But the underlying belief that the predisposition is real and that it travels through families has remained consistent since 2005. The second belief is that the substance is never the real problem. Randy does not drink because he loves beer. He drinks because being Randy Marsh in a small town in Colorado without chemical assistance is something Randy has never learned how to do. The show demonstrated this in Bloody Mary when it showed that the AA meetings, which focused entirely on the substance, made Randy worse instead of better. The disease model gave Randy permission to stop trying. If the problem is a disease and only a miracle can cure it, then Randy does not need to examine what the drinking is actually doing for him. He does not need to ask why he reaches for the bottle at the moments he reaches for it. He just needs to declare himself sick and wait for God to intervene. Stan rejected this framework at 9 years old. He told his father the problem was not the alcohol, the problem was the lack of discipline. And while the show's position has evolved since then, incorporating genetic predisposition and systemic exploitation and the limits of individual willpower, the core insight from Bloody Mary has never been contradicted. The substance is the delivery mechanism. The thing being delivered is whatever the person needs the substance to provide. For Randy, that is social confidence and an identity that feels meaningful. For Towelie, that is relief from the unbearable awareness of being a towel that nobody takes seriously. For Stan, that is the sensation of forward motion, of doing something, of chasing a dragon that always stays just out of reach. Remove the substance and the need does not disappear. It finds a new address. This is why Randy moved from alcohol to marijuana to cocaine to ketamine across the Tegrity Farms arc. Each substance was different. The need underneath each substance was the same. The show depicts this with enough consistency that it begins to feel less like a character flaw and more like the central fact of who Randy Marsh is. He is a man with a hole in him that no substance has ever filled, and the show has been watching him pour different things into that hole for 20 years without any of them working. The third belief is that moderation is the ideal. But the show does not believe moderation is achievable for its characters. Stan told Randy in 2005 that the answer was moderation. The show meant this when it said it. The sunset behind them, the music played, the piggyback ride home was sincere. And then the show spent the next 20 years demonstrating that Randy cannot moderate. He cannot drink a little. He cannot grow a little marijuana. He cannot care about something a moderate amount. Everything Randy touches becomes an obsession, and every obsession escalates until it consumes him and his family and, in the case of Tegrity Farms, the show itself. The gap between the stated ideal and the lived reality is the most honest thing the show has ever said about addiction. Moderation is the correct answer. It is the answer that Stan would give if you asked him today. It is the answer that Satan would give if you summoned him again and asked him to explain the human condition. Everyone in the show knows that moderation is the answer. Nobody in the show can actually do it. And the show keeps returning to this gap over and over, or because the gap is where the truth lives. The truth about addiction is not that people do not know what they should do. It is that knowing and doing are separated by a distance that willpower alone cannot always cross. The fourth belief is that systems are more dangerous than substances. South Park has never directed its greatest fury at alcohol or marijuana or cocaine or any specific chemical. Its greatest fury has been directed at the systems that profit from addiction. The freemium game industry that exploits dopamine vulnerabilities for microtransaction revenue. The alcohol industry that wraps its product in aspirational imagery and then whispers, "Drink responsibly" in text too small to read. The AA meetings that tell vulnerable people they are powerless and that only a higher power can save them, removing personal agency at the exact moment when personal agency is most needed. The Canadian devil in freemium isn't free is not dangerous because he tempts people. He is dangerous because he has built a system specifically designed to identify people with addictive tendencies and extract the maximum amount of money from them. Satan, who is literally the personification of temptation, looks at Beelzebub's operation and calls it blatant Skinner box manipulation. Satan puts temptation in front of people so they can exercise free will. Beelzebub removes free will from the equation entirely by engineering an experience that bypasses rational decision-making and targets the dopamine system directly. The show's position is clear. Temptation is acceptable. Exploitation is not. A person who chooses to drink is exercising agency. A system that engineers its product to disable the very faculty that allows a person to choose is committing something the show considers genuinely evil. This distinction runs through every addiction episode the show has produced. From the fake alcohol commercial in Freemium Isn't Free to the corporate marijuana industry that Randy alternately fights and joins across the Tegrity Farms arc. The fifth belief is that children see more clearly than adults. In Bloody Mary, Stan is the one who understands what Randy cannot. In Freemium Isn't Free, the kids are the ones who identify the predatory system while Randy lectures about demons he cannot see in himself. In Guitar Queero, Stan recognizes that the real loss is the friendship, not the game. In Up the Down Steroid, it is Timmy, a child with severe communication limitations, who sees Jimmy's cheating before anyone else does. The adults in South Park are the ones with the addictions. The children are the ones who see the addictions for what they are. This is not sentimentality. The show does not present children as innocent or pure or morally superior in some abstract way. It presents them as honest in a way that adults have learned not to be. Stan does not know how to construct the kind of elaborate justification that allows Randy to call his drinking a smorgasbord. Kyle does not have the vocabulary to make freemium exploitation sound like a legitimate business model the way the Canadian Minister of Mobile Gaming does. The children in South Park lack the tools that adults use to disguise their behavior from themselves, which means they are forced to see things plainly. And in the context of addiction stories, seeing plainly is the one skill that matters most, because the first thing addiction destroys is the ability to see what you are doing. The show trusts its children to deliver its moral conclusions because the children are the only characters whose vision has not been distorted by the substances they are looking at. The adults are too close to the problem to see its shape. The children can see it because they are standing outside it, looking in, and what they see is simple and true and consistently the same. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting us. You can stop. The answer is not surrender, and it is not a miracle. The answer is discipline and moderation and the willingness to do something difficult every single day without the guarantee that it will ever become easy. These 5 beliefs have been present in South Park since season 9. The show has never assembled them into a single statement. It has never put them in a character's mouth or built an episode around stating them directly. They exist the way a current exists in a river, visible not as a single object but as a pattern of motion that only becomes clear when you watch long enough to see the whole flow. The show did not set out to build a unified theory of addiction. Parker and Stone do not talk about the show in these terms. They make episodes in 6 days and move on. But the accumulated weight of 28 seasons of choices, the characters they created and the arcs they gave them, and the resolutions they offered and the resolutions they withheld adds up to something the individual episodes do not announce. A worldview forms itself from the parts. The parts were never designed to fit together. They fit anyway. And the picture they create is more complete and more honest than any single episode managed on its own. South Park signed a deal in July 2025 worth $1.5 billion. Paramount Global committed to 50 new episodes, approximately 10 per year, securing the show through at least 2029 or 2030. By the time that deal concludes, South Park will have been on the air for more than 30 years. 338 episodes have already aired across 28 seasons as of December 2025. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who created the show in their mid-20s, are now in their mid-50s. They have been making South Park for longer than many of their viewers have been alive. There's a version of the story where that longevity is celebrated without qualification. A show that survived 2 cancellations in its early years, outlasted nearly every competitor it faced, remained culturally relevant across 3 decades, and secured a deal that guarantees its continuation into a 4th. That is a success story. It is also, when you look at it through the lens of everything we have discussed tonight, something else entirely. South Park cannot stop. This is not a metaphor. The show has been renewed through the end of the decade. The production cycle that produces an episode every 6 days will continue turning. The characters who have been cycling through crisis and reset and return to baseline since 1997 will continue cycling. Randy will drink. Towelie will use. And Stan will watch his father and feel the pull of the same vulnerability in his own blood. The machine does not have an off switch because the machine was never designed to stop. It was designed to produce, and it has been producing at a rate that has not slowed in 28 years. The Tegrity Farms arc was the clearest illustration of this dynamic that the show has ever produced, and the irony of it is so perfect that it almost seems intentional. Randy Marsh could not stop growing marijuana even when his family begged him to. South Park could not stop making Tegrity episodes even when its audience begged it to. Randy kept going because the farm had become his identity, and he did not know who he was without it. The show kept going because the storyline had become a structural pillar of its season planning, and the writers did not know how to build episodes without it. Randy's addiction to the farm and the show's addiction to the storyline operated on the same logic. Both persisted past the point where they were serving the people involved. Both were sustained by momentum rather than purpose. Both produced diminishing returns that everyone could see except the person or people responsible for continuing them. And both ended not with a moment of clarity, but with an external force making continuation impossible. Randy's farm failed financially. The show's audience pushed back loudly enough that the writers finally heard them. Neither quit because they wanted to. Both quit because the conditions that allowed the habit to continue changed. Parker and Stone have talked in interviews about the pressure of the 6-day production cycle. They have described weeks where the script is not finished on Tuesday night and the episode must be delivered on Wednesday morning. They have described the physical and creative toll of producing a show at this pace for this long. The season 27 delays, where an episode was pushed back by an additional week and the creators released a public apology, saying apparently when you do everything at the last minute, sometimes you do not get it done, are evidence that even the machine that runs on urgency eventually reaches moments where the urgency cannot produce results fast enough. This is the show's own version of the pattern it depicts in its characters. The cycle sustains itself because the cycle is all anyone knows. Parker and Stone have been making South Park since they were young men. The 6-day cycle is not just how they work, it is how they have organized their creative lives for nearly 3 decades. Stopping the cycle, or even slowing it meaningfully, would require them to answer the same question Randy faced when the farm closed. Who am I without this? The show knows this about itself. It has demonstrated that self-awareness in ways both subtle and explicit. The Streaming Wars specials, which aired on Paramount Plus, included moments where Randy essentially acknowledged that the Tegrity focus had gone too far and that the show needed to return to its roots. These moments were meta-commentary, the show looking at itself in a mirror and describing what it saw. And then the show continued doing the thing it had just criticized itself for doing, which is exactly what a person in the grip of a compulsion does when they achieve momentary self-awareness. They see the problem, they name the problem, and then they continue because seeing and naming are not the same as stopping. Season 27 brought the Tegrity arc to a close. Randy sold the farm, the Marsh family moved back to town, Stan got his old house back. The show signaled through the mechanics of its plot and the reactions of its characters that the era of Randy as the central figure was ending and the focus would return to the children. Fans celebrated, critics noted the shift with approval. The show appeared to be correcting course. But the correction itself follows a familiar pattern. Randy has corrected course before. He'd learned moderation in Bloody Mary and was drinking normally by the next episode. He confronted his demons in Freemium Isn't Free and was denying his alcoholism again within a season. He briefly returned to his old self in the Streaming Wars specials and then went right back to the farm. The show's history suggests that corrections are temporary and that the default state, whatever the default state is for a character or a show, reasserts itself eventually. Whether South Park will stay corrected after season 27, or whether it will find a new version of the Tegrity trap, A new obsession for Randy that consumes the show the way the farm consumed it is a question that cannot be answered yet. The show has 50 more episodes guaranteed. That is 5 more years of 6-day cycles, 5 more years of weekly resets, 5 more years of opportunities to either build on what it has learned or forget it and start over. The show's addiction stories have always been about the gap between knowing and doing. Randy knows he drinks too much. He cannot stop. Stan knows his family carries a genetic vulnerability. He cannot fully protect himself from it. Towelie knows the drugs are destroying him. He cannot stay clean. The knowledge is always present, the behavior does not change, and the gap between the two, that space where a person lives with full awareness of what they are doing and full inability to do otherwise, is the territory South Park has been mapping since its 9th season. The show itself lives in that gap now. It knows what it is, it knows what its audience wants, it knows that the episodic format prevents the accumulation of consequences, and that the 6-day cycle produces a kind of creative dependency that is difficult to break. It knows all of this. The question is whether knowing is enough. For Randy, knowing was never enough. For Towelie, knowing was never enough. For Stan, the jury is still out because Stan is still young and the show has not yet decided whether the Marsh bloodline's vulnerability will define him or whether he will find a way to manage it that his father and grandfather could not. For South Park, the show, the question is the same. Can a thing that has been running for 28 years on the same cycle, producing the same patterns, resetting to the same baseline, learn to do something different? Or is the format itself the addiction, and the episodes the doses and the renewal deals the supply chain that ensures the next fix is always available? The show does not know the answer. It has never known the answer. And the honesty of not knowing, of continuing to ask the question season after season without ever arriving at a conclusion that sticks, might be the most truthful thing South Park has ever said about what it means to live with something you cannot quit. There's a moment at the end of Bloody Mary that has stayed in the show's history longer than anything else in the episode. Longer than the bleeding statue, longer than the Catholic League's fury, longer than Randy in the wheelchair or the Pope's investigation or any of the controversy that consumed the public conversation about what the episode had done. The moment is this. Stan tells his father the truth. Randy listens. And then Randy bends down and Stan climbs onto his back and Randy carries his son home while the sun goes down behind them. It is a simple image. A father carrying a child. The camera holds on them from behind as they move down the street, getting smaller, the light getting warmer. The episode does not add music over this moment, or if it does, the music is quiet enough that what you remember is the silence, the walking, the carrying. A man who 5 minutes ago was in a wheelchair because he believed he was helpless, now walking under his own power because his son told him he could. South Park has produced 338 episodes. It has satirized presidents and religions and corporations and social movements. It has been banned in China, condemned by the Catholic Church, celebrated by libertarians, and criticized by conservatives and progressives in equal measure. Well, it has made an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of noise, and it has earned its place in the history of American television as one of the most influential and most polarizing shows of its era. And underneath all of that, running quietly through the show's entire lifespan like water under pavement, there's a story about a family in a small town in Colorado that cannot stop reaching for the thing in front of them. A grandfather who gambles, a father who drinks, a son who spends money he does not have on a game that was designed to exploit him. A talking towel who uses every substance available because the alternative is being fully present in a life that offers him nothing. A disabled boy who took steroids and was the only person in the show's history to look at what he had done, admit it publicly, and walk away clean. These are not the stories South Park is famous for. Nobody puts Randy's DUI on a list of the show's most iconic moments. Nobody ranks the Towelie intervention alongside Scott Tenorman Must Die or Make Love Not Warcraft or the Muhammad controversy episodes. The addiction stories exist in the spaces between the big events and the episodes that air and are discussed for a week and then fade as the next controversy arrives. They are the background hum of the show, the thing that is always there but rarely loud enough to dominate the conversation. And yet they are, taken together, the most consistent thing the show has ever done. Parker and Stone have changed their minds about politics. They have changed their approach to serialization. They have changed the animation style, the episode length, the distribution platform, and the target audience. The one thing they have never changed is their belief that substances fill a space that was empty before they arrived, and that the space does not close when the substance is removed. They have been saying this since Stan stood on a sidewalk in 2005 and told his father that moderation was the answer. And they are still saying it in 2025 when Randy closed the door on an empty farmhouse and walked away from a marijuana empire that had replaced everything else in his life. The argument was never about whether drugs are bad or alcohol is dangerous or gambling ruins families. Those are simple arguments, and South Park has never been interested in simple arguments. The argument was always about the space, the void that exists before the substance arrives, the need that the substance addresses without ever resolving, the gap between who a person is and who a person wants to be, that the substance makes tolerable for as long as the substance is active, and that returns in full the moment the substance wears off. Randy's void is the fear that he is ordinary, that without an obsession, without a project, without something to organize his entire personality around, he is just a geologist in a small town with a wife and 2 kids, and nothing that distinguishes him from anyone else on his block. The marijuana farm filled that void. The drinking before it filled that void. The next thing, whatever it is, will fill it too. Not because Randy is weak, but because the void is real. And moderation, for all its wisdom as an ideal, requires a person to sit with the void rather than fill it. And sitting with a void is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Towelie's void is simpler and sadder. He is a towel. He knows he is a towel. The world treats him like a towel. The drugs let him forget briefly that the world is right about him. Every high is a temporary vacation from the truth of what he is, and every come down is a return to a reality that has not improved in his absence. Stan's void is the one that frightens the show most, because Stan's void is inherited, and Stan is young enough that it has not fully formed yet. He carries the genes, he has the predisposition. Satan told him so. The question of whether Stan will develop the kind of void that his father fills with alcohol and his grandfather fills with slot machines is a question the show has been asking for more than a decade without answering. Stan is the Marsh family's best chance at breaking the cycle. He is also, by the show's own established logic, the person most likely to continue it. And the show has left him suspended between those 2 possibilities because resolving the question in either direction would end a story the show is not ready to end. South Park knows more than it admits. It always has. The show hides its real arguments inside jokes. It buries its truest observations under layers of absurdity and profanity and controversy so thick that most people never dig down far enough to find what is underneath. The bleeding statue gets the headlines. The conversation on the sidewalk goes unnoticed. The China ban makes international news. The scene where Randy closes the door on an empty farmhouse barely registers. But the things underneath are the things that last. 20 years from now, nobody will remember the specific controversies that accompanied any individual episode of South Park. They will remember the characters. They will remember Randy at the bar, and Towelie in the woods, and Stan on the sidewalk, and Jimmy at the microphone. They will remember the feeling of watching a show that kept circling back to the same questions about why people use things and what it costs them, and whether the cost can be managed or whether it just accumulates invisibly until one day the farmhouse is empty and the door closes and there is nothing left to do but carry what you can and walk away. You just spent a long time watching carefully enough. You lined up the episodes, you connected the characters, you saw the pattern that no individual episode was designed to create. And the pattern says this: well, South Park has been telling the same story for 28 years. A story about people who cannot stop reaching for the thing in front of them. And a small town where the reaching is so ordinary that it looks like living. The show will continue, the cycle will restart. New episodes will arrive and new substances will be introduced and new characters will face the same old question. And somewhere inside each of those episodes, buried under the comedy and the controversy and the 6-day production cycle that never stops turning, there will be a moment where someone sees clearly. A 9-year-old boy on a sidewalk, a towel holding his son for the first time, a disabled kid at a microphone giving back a medal he did not earn, a father closing a door on an empty room. Those moments are what the show leaves behind. Not the arguments or the satire or the controversy, the moments. And if you watch carefully enough tonight, you found them all. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. There is one more thing worth saying before this is over, something about the way South Park uses Satan that connects to everything we have talked about tonight. Satan has appeared in South Park dozens of times across the show's run. He is a recurring character with a personality that the show has developed with more care than it gives to most of its human cast. He is large, muscular, emotional, insecure, and consistently depicted as the most reasonable person in any room he enters. He is in an abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein for multiple seasons. He throws a Halloween party and worries about the guest list. He is, in the world of South Park, a fully realized person who happens to also be the literal embodiment of evil. And the show sends him to explain addiction. Not Mr. Mackey, the school counselor whose job it is to educate children about drugs. Not Randy, who has more personal experience with substance abuse than any other character on the show. Not a doctor or a therapist or any of the professional authority figures that a different show would use to deliver medical information. South Park sends Satan, the Prince of Darkness, the Lord of Hell, the being whose entire cosmic purpose is to tempt human beings into making bad choices. And Satan delivers the most accurate, most compassionate, most scientifically grounded explanation of addiction that the show has ever produced. He sits on Stan's bed, he uses visual aids, he talks about dopamine regulation and genetic predisposition, and the difference between genuine pleasure and Skinner box manipulation. He is patient, he is kind, he does not judge Stan for having a problem. He explains the problem in terms Stan can understand, and then offers practical help in the form of possessing Stan's body and traveling to Canada to physically fight the demon responsible for the freemium game. The choice to make Satan the show's addiction expert is not random. It is the show expressing something it believes deeply, which is that the truth about addiction does not come from the places you expect it to come from. It does not come from authority figures. And it does not come from 12-step programs or school counselors or parents who are too deep in their own denial to see straight. It comes from the place you would least expect. It comes from the bottom, from the darkness, from the figure that the entire moral framework of Western civilization has designated as the source of all temptation. Satan knows addiction because Satan is addiction's neighbor. He lives next door to it. He has watched it work from the inside. He understands the mechanics not as a clinician, but as someone who has spent eternity watching human beings make the same choices over and over, and who has developed across that eternity something that looks remarkably like empathy for the people caught inside the cycle. This is South Park at its most subversive and its most sincere. The devil is not the enemy in this story. The devil is the teacher. The enemy is the system that exploits the weakness, the corporation that designs the trap, the industry that profits from the fall. Satan puts temptation in front of people so they can exercise free will. The Canadian devil removes free will from the equation and calls it a business model. And the show's position, stated through the mouth of the Prince of Hell, is that the second thing is worse than the first. That honest temptation is more moral than dishonest exploitation. That the devil you know is better than the algorithm you do not. South Park gave its clearest statement about addiction to Satan because Satan was the only character in the show honest enough to deliver it. Not because the other characters are liars, but because the other characters are too invested in their own relationship with substances to see the pattern clearly. Randy cannot explain addiction because Randy is an addict who will not use the word. Towelie cannot explain addiction because Towelie is in the middle of it. Stan cannot explain addiction because Stan is 9 and does not yet have the vocabulary for what he is feeling. Only Satan, who exists outside the human experience while understanding it completely, has the distance and the honesty to say what needs to be said. The drugs did not make you broken. Your brain chemistry and your genetics and the systems designed to exploit both of those things made you vulnerable. And vulnerability is not weakness, it is the human condition. The only question is what you do with it once you know it is there. Or that is what Satan told Stan Marsh on a bed in South Park, Colorado. That is what South Park has been telling its audience in fragments and contradictions and resets and moments of accidental grace for 28 years.